some news sites now reporting that Russia's President Putin saying that there are positive changes in talks with Ukraine. Remember, Russia and Ukraine delegations have met quite recently in Turkey. Since then, have there been any further developments? This is from the Spectator Index. Vishnu Shom joining us with the latest on that. Vishnu, what are we hearing?
So this has been reported by the Spectator Index, but in fact it's been picked up by Reuters as well, and is on the basis of a discussion which Vladimir Putin has had with the Belarusian leader. Remember, Belarus is the country where most of the talks between Ukraine and Russia have actually been taking place. The talks which took place in Antalya in Turkey didn't really achieve a great deal. The foreign minister of Ukraine seemed to indicate that there was nothing positive which the Russians were willing to actually put on the table in terms of a ceasefire. But now Putin is reported to have said that there are positive changes in Ukraine talks, but in the same breath, and I should mention this, Russia's defense minister has been saying that military operations in Ukraine are going according to plan. Now, Russia has all along wanted to talk at the Belarusian level, and talks in Belarus, one-on-one talks. So it is interesting that Putin says this, but this is whether this actually translates into anything substantive, whether this is actually the exit ramp which Vladimir Putin is looking for, because the war, let's face it, is going disastrously for Russia at this stage. Despite which, in the long run, perhaps they'll be able to overcome the defenses of Ukraine. But whether this is an indicator of a possible off-ramp which Putin is looking for, given what his army has been facing on the ground, it's very, very early to say.
Right. Well, it seems Russia's president has also met his Belarusian counterpart, Lukashenko, but, clearly no details at this point, Vishnu, about what this positive progress is. But would you say that there were some hints of this coming earlier, for instance, a somewhat softening, a bit of a thaw in the stances of both sides when President Zelensky said NATO membership was no longer something that Ukraine was insisting upon?
So that's the low-hanging fruit which everybody hopes might be something that Putin actually accepts, because in fact in the last more than a week now, Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has toned down their initial position, which was that it is their right to apply for NATO or hope for NATO membership. But he has now said in the last 48 hours, in fact before that talk or the meeting in Antalya and Turkey, that look, we've cooled down from our position on NATO, and so we are not making that request anymore. But what Russia wants is a lot more beyond that. They want a full-fledged recognition of the Donbas region, which is Lugansk and which includes the town of Lugansk. They also want a full-fledged and Donetsk, and they want a full-fledged recognition of Crimea as well, which is an area which they annexed in 2014. So whether that alone is something which Ukraine is willing to do, that seems unclear. Ukraine wanted a ceasefire. The Russians haven't accepted that ceasefire. In fact, the foreign minister of Ukraine yesterday said that there was an expectation the foreign minister of Ukraine yesterday said that there was a Russian expectation that Ukraine would surrender. And he said that we aren't surrendering. So if they aren't surrendering, and yet Putin says that there are some positive changes, is that statement perhaps an indicator that he may accept, at least initially, the Ukrainian willingness, albeit stated informally, that they no longer want NATO membership? Is that good enough? If it is, then that's certainly a step forward. But there's a lot more which Russia has demanded, to which Ukraine has not accepted. And the Ukrainians have said they're not surrendering. So, it's mixed signals at this stage, but certainly something that needs to be looked at closely.
Right. Of course, Vishnu, at this point, this is on a day when Russia has clearly also widened its assault on Ukraine. There are reports of several Western Ukrainian cities coming under massive bombardment and sort of fatalities rising, including civilian casualties. As this sort of threatens to turn into a protracted a war, obviously heavy casualties on both sides, can either Russia or Ukraine really afford to have this continue?
Afford to have this continue. And I think that's thanks for asking that. This not remotely. The sanctions are bound to hit Russia sooner than later. There is only so much that the Russians are able to do to protect their economy or ice.
All right, we seem to be having some trouble with your audio, Vishnu. We'll try and reconnect with you. But the big breaking story right now, Russia's President Putin indicating today that there has been some progress in Moscow's talks with Ukraine. However, he's provided no details, it seems. He was quoted as saying there's certain positive shifts. Negotiators on our side tell me. He said this in a meeting with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko, adding that talks are continuing practically on a daily basis with the Ukrainian side. Now, obviously, at this point, this has to be greeted with some circumspection. We do not have Mr. Putin elaborating on what he means by these positive changes. But he also said in televised remarks that he would go into more details with the Belarusian President Lukashenko. So perhaps there will be some indication there of just what these positive shifts are. Have there been certain indications in the last few days that there could be some sort of faint thaw, at least on both sides, a softening of stance? We've heard from the Ukrainian president saying he didn't want to beg to be part of NATO or go down on his knees to be part of NATO. And obviously there is some degree of, a great degree of disappointment about how NATO has responded following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On the Russian side, perhaps this has already gone on for far longer than President Putin would have imagined. Russian troops have come under heavy drone fire from Ukrainian forces. Many Russian tanks struck by anti-tank missiles, damages and casualties on both sides. As for Ukraine, a growing humanitarian crisis now. The United Nations estimates that 2.2 million Ukrainians have now fled the country. Casualties on both sides also very high. According to U.S. Analysts, up to 6,000 Russian troops could have been killed, and Ukrainian casualties could also number up to 4,000. There have been at least 550 civilian casualties already in this war, and over 40 children have also died.